All right. So I have a special report for you today. I just lost about half of my hours at one of the community colleges where I tutor, thanks to an administrative decision to outsource about half of the college's public tutoring services to a private company called Upswing, which utilizes an artificial intelligence bot called Anna. So when I first heard the news about the college's decision to contract with Upswing, I was initially under the impression that the Anna AI bot was going to be automating the tutoring. Now, although the Anna AI does not directly tutor students, it does intermediate Upswing's virtual online tutoring platform in order to data mine students' learning outcomes for social credit profiling and social impact investing. So today I'll be breaking down how Upswing is not only privatizing public education, but also how it is deploying AI to data mine students in order to extrapolate social credit analytics to tokenize human capital bonds in the social impact finance economy of the fourth industrial revolution. Okay, so we'll take a look at Anna, a little promo of the bot. Then we'll also look at some of the types of data that Anna collects on the Upswing company website. And then we'll also look at the nexus of venture capital and social impact investment firms that have been funding Upswing. Okay, and then I'm going to break down how the data aggregated by Anna is going to be used to quantify learning outcomes in terms of future economic gains in order to securitize those future economic gains into human capital bonds backed by investments from social impact finance firms. Okay, so before we take a look at Anna and the network of venture capital and social impact finance firms behind Upswing, let's take a moment to define what exactly is social impact finance and how exactly does it work. Okay, so social impact finance or impact investing, it basically works like this. So you have a for profit or nonprofit corporation or organization that puts money up front in order to achieve certain social impacts. And these social impacts could be classified as educational impacts, they could be qualified as healthcare impacts, they could be qualified as workforce development impacts, they could be tailored to particular marginalized communities that fall under the diversity, equity, and inclusion spectrum. And they could also fall under sustainable development impacts as well. So the impact investment firm puts money up front to achieve some of these outcomes or impacts, and then they will receive that money back from the government based on the extent to which they have achieved those impacts or outcomes. So if they achieve all of their prospectus impacts and outcomes, they get all of their money back. If they exceed their prospectus, they can earn a profit. Okay. And in the sphere of education, there are specific types of impact investments known as pay for success partnerships. And there are provisions provided for those pay for success or PFS public-private partnerships in the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is basically the main federal bill that oversees public education in the United States of America. Okay, so let me take a moment here to disabuse you of any notion that these impact investment firms are primarily concerned with improving the socioeconomic lots of disenfranchised people. Underneath the veneer of all the humanitarian social justice ethos, impact investing is really ultimately all about creating new markets for new financial instruments that algorithmically securitize literal human resources into human capital bonds that can be bought and sold like digital chattel traded through the portfolios of techno-feudal lords bent on dominating the global social credit economy of the fourth industrial revolution. All right, so real quick, let's just look at some of the global indexes that provide sort of the umbrella criteria or metrics for social impact investments, those being the diversity, equity, inclusion, sustainable development, and then also what is known as the environmental, social, and governance scoring, which is basically corporate social credit scoring that kind of encompasses both the DEI stuff and the SDG or sustainable development goal stuff. Okay, so here we'll see that the ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance Scoring Index, is heavily promoted by the World Economic Forum. So we'll just take a moment here to scroll through this so I can illustrate how the E, or environmental, part of ESG scoring refers to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, how the S, or social, part of the ESG scoring basically refers to diversity and equity and inclusion metrics, or DEI metrics, and then how the G, or governance, part in the ESG scoring refers largely to stakeholder metrics. In other words, public-private partnership metrics based on stakeholder capitalism, which is the brainchild of the former head of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. All right, so without actually reading through all of the documents that are referenced on this ESG page on the World Economic Forum's website, let's just do a keyword search for sustainability. And it's there 66 times. And if we just kind of scroll through here, right, you can see importance of environmental sustainability. So right away, right, it's associating environmental metrics with sustainable development metrics. And if we do a keyword search for environmental sustainability, right, several references. Okay, so let's take a look at diversity. Right there, right away, we have diversity, equity, and inclusion. All right, and then let's see, stakeholders, stakeholder capitalism, public, private. It is public-private dialogue, public-private cooperation, public-private partnerships. So basically, this one's looking at ESG efforts in terms of sustainability issues concerning a wider group of stakeholders using cross-industry stakeholder capitalism metrics. Now you can see that these terms are kind of recursive, or at least if you map them like a Venn diagram, the E, the S, and the G, right, there's a nexus point at which they all kind of intersect and overlap. And I'll show you right now that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, are very similar in that regard. They're not just focused on environmental issues, they are also focused on other social issues that could fall under the DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion metrics. It's also concerned about various stakeholder metrics in terms of public-private partnerships. And so all three of the E, the S, and the G, environmental, social, and governance metrics, are all sort of embedded in the SDGs as well. So here, let's just take a look at that. Okay, so here is the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and this has a little infographic chart of the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, so the ones that you would think of as immediately concerning the environment, the E part of the ESG, that would be goals number 13, 14, and 15, SDG number 13, 14, and 15. Number 13 focused on climate action. Number 14 focused on life below water. So I guess biodiversity stewardship in terms of the oceans, and then life on land. So biodiversity stewardship in terms of above water, earth and sky. Got little pictures of birds there and a tree. So biodiversity of the terrasphere and the atmosphere. So closely related to that in terms of the environment, next in line would be responsible consumption and production, SDG number 12. Right. So insofar as you're being a steward of the biodiversity, necessarily the natural resources, right, that would entail responsible consumption and production of those resources. But now we're also actually getting into economics and supply chain dynamics, which is going to be more of an equity or social implication, right? So where the E and the S sort of would overlap in that Venn diagram. Here's another one, number 7, affordable and clean energy. But then you'll see that goals like SDG number 8 and number 9 are looking largely at economic issues. So those would have more to do with social equity-based metrics, and especially when we start to get into reduced inequalities. Now we're moving from socioeconomic issues to potentially ethnic issues or gender issues or some of those other intersectional identity groups that fall under the metrics of diversity and equity scoring. And then you'll see that number 5 is specifically concerned with gender, equity, and diversity. Now, if we scroll down here and take a look at the last SDG, number 17, partnerships for the goals, this one is going to be concerned with stakeholder metrics and public-private partnerships. So let's open this one up. All right, so this button used to be able to click on these links, and then you go here, and then it would show you a breakdown of the goal. There's bullet points. Each of the SDGs, 1 through 17, also has a series of subpoints. For some reason, they feel that that information is it's not necessary to provide like readily and easily accessible. Like, I don't know, when you click on number 17, but what I'll show you is a slide I made for a presentation in which I covered the particular subpoints of SDG number 17 that are relevant to illustrate that it represents stakeholder metrics and public-private partnerships. Okay, so you see here that SDG 17.16 is about developing multi-stakeholder partnerships. And if you look at SDG 17.17, that one emphasizes the development of public-private partnerships. Okay, and you can probably find a UN website somewhere that still actually has a breakdown of these sub-bullets for each of the SDGs, but I've already digressed too much for the focus of this particular report here. The point here was simply to illustrate that the environmental, social, and governance, ESG scoring, the sustainable development goals, SDG metrics, and the diversity, equity, and inclusion scoring, the DEI metrics, that these are all sort of recursively interchangeable or at least intersectional, and they are all reified and reinforced by globalist institutions such as the World Economic Forum and the United Nations, which basically set the bar for these indexes that calculate how social impact investments are achieved based on AI analytics. All right, so now let's take a look at Upswing and its bot, Anna. So we'll scroll down a little bit here. Okay, so you'll see that they offer tutoring services. They offer mental health support, both of which are intermediated by the Anna bot, which means that Anna is going to have access not only to learning data, learning analytics, but also health and wellness data. So that means that Anna could facilitate the data mining needed for social impact investments, not only to achieve educational or learning impacts through Upswing, but also to achieve health and wellness impacts. So in other words, Upswing could be an intermediary to facilitate not just social impact finance investments in education, but also social impact finance investments in healthcare. All right, so let's take a look at their promo that they have for Anna, which is their AI bot. All right, so if we scroll down a little bit, there's a little demo with a promotional for Anna and all of its functions. So let's take a look. Okay, so it's going to help the student with basically time management and organization, which could be helpful. But then now this bot also has access not only to the students' learning analytics, but it's also going to be able to contextualize those algorithms within the patterns of the students' daily lifestyle routines. So basically, it's going to be able to correlate the students' learning analytics with a bunch of other metadata. Now, in this promo here, you see it appears to be connecting the student with a human tutor through some sort of a video conferencing interface. They do have human tutors at Upswing, but in order for Upswing and Anna to keep track of the student's progress towards his or her career pathways or other learning goals, that interface, that video conferencing dashboard with the whiteboard in the middle and the grading and collaboration tools, that digital medium through which the tutoring occurs between the human student on one end and the human tutor on the other end is going to necessarily be embedded with all sorts of data mining features that enable it to track and trace the student's learning progress from tutoring session to tutoring session. And that'll go into the student's profile, which can then be utilized to leverage social impact investments, not only to upswing, but particular schools that partner with Upswing in order to improve those student outcomes. Okay, so again, Anna here isn't actually doing the mental health counseling. The bot is connecting the student with some institutional services partnered with Upswing. Okay, but notice here that it's going to be the same Anna AI bot that is keeping track of the students' mental health requests and their tutoring requests. So, in other words, it's going to be keeping track of both education records and healthcare records, right? Educational records are supposed to be protected by FERPA laws. Healthcare records are supposed to be protected by HIPAA laws. The two of those are not supposed to overlap. There's supposed to be a sort of a hard firewall in between how those different types of data are collected, protected, and shared. Okay, but in this one bot, Anna, you have essentially one digital medium through which both of these types of data are going to be aggregated along with all that other metadata about the students' other everyday routines, going to work, spending time with family, shopping habits, other extracurricular hobbies or activities, etc. So now in this one Anabot, you have a battery of various biopsychosocial data that could be leveraged for a wide array of different predictive analytics that could be monetized in the social impact finance economy of the fourth industrial revolution. Okay, so notice here that the bot and the human student are developing what appears to be a fairly strong emotional bond. The student says, sending much love and gratitude your way, referring to the bot. And then the bot has replied with heart emojis. So this is another line being crossed by the bot, which would never be acceptable for any teacher to ever cross, right? But totally acceptable for Anna to do, just like it's totally acceptable for Anna to collect and gather all these FERPA and HIPAA records in one space. All right, so now if you think that I'm presuming things about the nature of Anna's data mining capabilities, all you got to do is scroll up just a little bit here to see that the company on its own website boasts of all these different analytics that it has, particularly with respect to increasing student retention and graduation rates. If we go up here to their impact drop down menu, you'll see that they have a page titled Calculate Your ROI, Return on Investment. And student retention is your budget strategy. So explicitly tying learning outcomes in terms of money, in terms of a budget, right? Monetizing student outcomes or calculating them in terms of money. So it says, in the time of shrinking budgets, Upswing helps you protect your bottom line by retaining more students and the tuition revenue they represent. It's not just student support, it's a financial strategy. All right, now if we scroll down a little bit, they got this chart down here. Retention savings calculator, sample scenario. A sample school exhibiting these demographic and tuition numbers. If that school were to contract with Upswing and utilize its services, it will save these amounts of money over the course of 1, 2, and 3 years. So you can see now here, this is kind of gives us a window into how Upswing can calculate their student retention data and their learning outcomes in terms of tuition saved or money saved, right? And you could securitize that as a future expected profit or gain. And I know this is being framed in terms of saving, so it's like monies that's not lost. But assuming that's calculated into the expected gross or net revenues based on the expected attrition, right, built into the budgetary model, then these are additional monies in, right? So you could, however you want to think about them, right? This equation enables learning outcomes to be quantified as future expected profits or gains or monies in that can be thus securitized and put into human capital bonds that become the financial vehicles or instruments for social impact investing in the social credit economy of the fourth industrial revolution. Okay, and so now real quick, I just thought it would be useful to look at the Upswing company's blog page on Medium, and they've got a couple screenshots of what some of these analytics look like on the back end of the dashboard. So all the data that Anna extrapolates for institutions that are partnering with Upswing. So scroll down here. Okay, so it says after the tutoring session ends, data about the length of the session, as well as feedback from the coach and student, are recorded and used for analysis, as I explained earlier. By logging into the Upswing admin dashboard, faculty can get a good idea of how Upswing is working at their college. The first dashboard section gives admins a bird's eye view of what's going on. Okay, so we got a couple charts here that are illustrating institutional data. In other words, data that is institution-wide or data across the institution as opposed to just per an individual student. But if you scroll down, it says near the bottom is the all sessions section where admins can see every session that has taken place on Upswing and even drill down with specific queries. So this is where you would have data that pertains to individual students. And so you got basically a log of all the different students who have used various tutoring services. How long did the tutoring sessions last for? What subject was tutored, etc. Okay, and so then it sums up by saying that these dashboards allow for administrators at each college to get both a high-level view on the overall picture of their student support system while retaining the ability to access data on how to best support each unique student. So again, right, a composite of individualized data mining and institution-wide data mining. And then this data could be further sorted into different group analytics in terms of grouping students by freshman, sophomore, junior, senior class year, perhaps maybe socioeconomic background, maybe by gender, maybe by ethnicity. Okay, and then all together, Upswing can essentially tabulate batteries of various biopsychosocial profiles, both at the individual scale and at the group scale, in order to package the data for the purposes of facilitating various social impact investment projects. Okay, so now if you think that I am presuming things about Upswing's interest in data pertaining to students who are of various marginalized group, whether ethnic, gender, or socioeconomic, let's just take a look at the About page on the company website. So right away, it says Upswing exists to empower historically marginalized people to achieve their life goals. And if we scroll down and read the bio of the CEO, Melvin Hines, it states that Upswing was founded in 2013 by our current CEO and co-founder, Melvin Hines. Melvin grew up in South Georgia, attending a high school with limited resources, funding, or access. He was one out of only 68 to graduate out of a class of 250. He then went to the University of Georgia and found that he was underprepared for college and behind his classmates. He graduated from UGA despite the odds and founded Upswing based on the belief that where you're from shouldn't dictate your success in life. Every student should have access to the same support resources, regardless of who they are, where they come from, or where they live. So, based on this biography, Mr. Hines created this company in order to service marginalized students with similar backgrounds to himself. Now, I don't know if Mr. Hines considered himself to be marginalized in terms of his race or gender or socioeconomic bracket, or maybe all three. But if we look at the network of venture capital and social impact investment firms that have been funding Upswing, we'll see that their main concerns in their VC and impact finance projects is to improve outcomes or to improve impacts for groups who have been marginalized in terms of their ethnicity or their gender or their socioeconomic background or some combination of all three. And so outcomes data pertaining to students of those particular populations would be of particular interest to the venture capital and social impact investment firms that are behind Upswing and have been providing it with substantial funding for quite some time. All right, so let's take a look at who has been funding Upswing. All right, so before we dive into the nexus of venture capital and social impact investment firms, which are the bulk of the investors behind Upswing, there's a couple heavy hitters that are worth noting up front that are not impact investment firms or venture capital firms. So if we scroll up a little bit, right off the bat, we have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I've been writing about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for almost a decade at this point, and I've been covering everything from their involvement in the funding and facilitation of public-private school choice partnerships to adaptive learning courseware to social emotional learning biofeedback wearables to a range of other AI systems. And I've also written about the ways in which the Gates Foundation is working to synthesize or synergize all of these various technologies with blockchain distributed ledger technologies in order to facilitate the extrapolation of predictive learning analytics from students' ed tech devices that are then funneled into social credit databases. Okay, and if we go to the Gates Foundation's website, you can see here a grant for Upswing. Purpose to improve student success outcomes through retention and advising technology which scales on-campus resources by bringing them online, facilitating advising and academic coaching for non-traditional students. Okay, so next you'll see we have the Lumina Foundation. You may not have heard of the Lumina Foundation before, but if we go to the Lumina Foundation's website, we see here a grant of $500,000 for Upswing International Inc. And this is to support a scalable social enterprise focused on persistence and completion, targeting low income and non-traditional students. All right, so notice that both of these grants are focused not just on improving student outcomes in general or at large or in the broadest sense of the word, but specifically learning outcomes or educational outcomes for students of non-traditional and low income populations, so marginalized populations. So in other words, these grants are basically for improving ESG or DEI or some other social impact. Okay, so one of the reasons that I decided to zoom in on the Lumina Foundation a little bit, having never heard of them before, was that when I looked into their board of directors, if we scroll down a little bit, we'll see that Austin Goolsbee is on the Lumina Foundation's board of directors. Who is Austin Goolsbee? Well, he's currently the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. He formerly served under President Obama as one of his economic advisors, and he's also a member of the Order of Skull and Bones. Now, if you read my book, School World Order, you will get a crash course in how the Order of Skull and Bones was instrumental in importing the Prussian institutional model of compulsory schooling to the United States, where they imbued it with Hegelian collectivist philosophy and pedagogy, and then streamlined it with psychological conditioning methodologies based on the stimulus response conditioning theories of Wilhelm Wundt, which would later evolve into the behaviorism of people like John B. Watson and E.L. Thorndike, which would then again evolve further into the operant conditioning of B.F. Skinner, whose analog teaching machines have evolved into the modern digital adaptive learning courseware, which data mines students' cognitive behavioral algorithms in order to extrapolate predictive learning analytics for social credit scoring and social impact investing. All right, now one more before we look at the venture capital and impact investment firms. So JP Morgan Chase Bank commits $30 million to support historically black colleges and universities and students. Scroll down here, we'll see that part of this investment is $5 million for Upswing, an online student engagement organization that supports 11 HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, and 2 predominantly black institutions, and provides tutoring, student support, and other services to 49,000 HBCU students. So again, you can see here that JP Morgan Chase is investing in Upswing to help improve learning or educational outcomes for black populations who have been historically marginalized. So again, money's going into Upswing essentially to achieve certain ESG or DEI outcomes or impacts. Might be worth noting here that JP Morgan Chase is sort of the merger of the banking houses of both Morgan and Rockefeller, and the Rockefeller family is in fact a skull and bones family. Percy Rockefeller in particular was a member of the Order of Skull and Bones. Okay, so before we start looking at some of the particular venture capital firms and social impact investment firms that have been bankrolling Upswing, let's take a brief moment to distinguish between what is a venture capital firm and what is a social impact investment firm, and what are the ways in which they can overlap. So we've already defined what an impact investment firm is and how it works. So to distinguish, a venture capital is basically investment firms that are focusing on startup companies, usually startup technologies. So these are companies that are basically still in the germinal stage, more or less. They just need some funds in order to actually materialize the project. Now, the ways in which impact investing in venture capital investments can overlap is that perhaps this startup company, this startup tech operation is seeking to ultimately service marginalized communities or to remedy environmental maladies. So then such a startup would be a candidate for both venture capital investments and impact investments. And sometimes a particular investment firm will double as both, right? It'll basically be a venture capital firm that focuses predominantly, if not entirely, on startups that are geared towards achieving social impact outcomes. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the VC and impact investment firms behind Upswing. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the Google for Startups Accelerator. So this is more or less a venture capital arm of Google, which provides funding for startup companies that it sees as promising. So if we scroll down, you'll see that Upswing is on the list here, okay? But if we scroll back up, you'll see that this particular portfolio focuses on Black entrepreneurs. And so, again, this Google Startups Accelerator funding for Upswing is geared towards improving essentially DEI or ESG outcomes for traditionally marginalized Black population. Now, Google is another one of these big tech giants that I have written about more or less ad nauseum throughout my book and the rest of my articles. But one thing that would be worth noting here is that I have produced extensive documentation of Google's partnerships with the World Economic Forum and the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, both of which champion ESG scoring and the Sustainable Development Goals. All right, let's take a look at the next one. Rethink Education, Unlocking Human Potential Through Education Technology. Scroll down, it says about rethink education. Our mission is to unlock the full human potential of people who have been marginalized or underserved by investing in impactful education technology companies. We want to help people thrive in their work, their personal lives, and their civic engagement. We focus on helping those who are low income, cognitively or physically different, deskless workers, and the underemployed, the incarcerated, refugees, and other immigrants, the elderly, and those who experience persecution because of their race, gender, sexuality, or any other aspect of their identities. Now we could see all the ways in which these various categories fit into ESG, DEI, and SDG metrics. But if we go to their About page and we scroll down, we'll see that they explicitly use phrase diversity and inclusion. If we scroll down a little bit more, it says our commitment to ESG, specifically, explicitly ESG, environmental, social, and governance. We are committed to ESG through our own corporate practices and through our investments. To learn more about our ESG practices and goals, visit our dedicated page. And that would be this here. Our commitment to environmental, social, and governance standards. And down here it says explicitly, Rethink Capital Partners oversees and facilitates the development of a suite of impact investment vehicles which focus on financial and social returns, including gender equity, education, health, environmental sustainability, economic empowerment, and community development. And if we go back to the page where we were, you'll see that they invoke the stakeholder language, stakeholder metrics as well. Okay, and just to show you that Rethink Education, which is a division of Rethink Capital, just to show you that it does, in fact, fund Upswing, here it is. Now, it's also worth noting here that Rethink Education also funds McGraw-Hill, which has collaborated with Google, the World Economic Forum, and UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And Rethink Education also funds Wonder School, which is also funded by Andreessen Horowitz, which is the venture capital firm of Mark Andreessen. So if we scroll down, you'll see that Wonder School is also included in the Andreessen Horowitz VC portfolio. Now, in my most recent Unlimited Hangout article, which is titled From Project 2025 to the PayPal Presidency, School of Choice FinTech for a Blockchain Social Credit Economy, I document how Andreessen Horowitz is a corporate member of the Blockchain and Digital Assets Initiative of the World Economic Forum Center for Financial and Monetary Systems. Here's a screenshot of it there, but if I click on this link here, it should take us to the actual WEF page. Here it is, Andreessen Horowitz. If we scroll down, you'll see that this is the Andreessen Horowitz profile page for the WEF's blockchain and digital assets platform at their Center for Financial and Monetary System. Okay, and it's also worth noting here that my article documents how Andreessen Horowitz has been funding several digital wallet companies that are going to be integral to the social credit and social impact finance economy of the fourth industrial revolution. So these include Odyssey, and then along with Odyssey, Merit International, which authenticates its digital wallet purchases through what it calls a digital identity ecosystem. Okay, next on the list is a venture capital firm known as Next Cubed. So if we scroll down through their portfolio, we'll see Upswing right here. Okay. And then if we scroll down to the bottom of their About page, we will see that the company provides a vision statement which says, changing the world one startup at a time. We aim to infuse environmental, social, and governance principles into the DNA of early stage startups. Okay, so another venture capital firm bankrolling Upswing in order to facilitate ESG impacts or outcomes. Okay. All right, so next on the list is sustain VC. And if we scroll to the bottom of it, we will see that Upswing appears in their portfolio. If you look at the captions underneath these various investments in this portfolio, you'll see that some of them are tagged as climate and sustainability. Some of them are tagged as access and opportunity. As we noted, both of those can be considered sustainable development metrics, depending on which of the SDGs, sustainable development goals, you're referencing. And so, sustain VC, obviously, it's in the title, right? Is investing in Upswing in order to achieve sustainable development goals, SDGs, right? Or another way to say that is ESG, or social impacts or outcomes that are based on SDG metrics, or sustainable development metrics. Again, recursively interchangeable and intersectional. All right, next one is Bonsall Capital. So again, if we scroll down, we'll find Upswing as one of their investments. Okay. And if we scroll up, you'll see that their focus is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this venture capital firm is bankrolling Upswing in order to advance DEI outcomes on the social impact scale under the broader umbrella of ESG and SDG metrics and indexes. All right, next on the list is Village Capital. We are looking at its impact investment portfolio. And if we scroll down, we will find Upswing. Okay. So not only do they have an explicit impact investment portfolio, but if we go to their homepage, we'll see that their mission is unlocking social and financial capital for impact creating startups, solving the world's biggest problems. And if we scroll down a little bit to see what types of social impacts they focus on, we can see that some of them are economic mobility or equitable access to essential services. So equity, and then over here, climate innovation and adaptation. So environment. So again, targeting investments that impact ESG and SDG outcomes. Okay. All right. So the rest of these are impact investment firms of various stripes. So the first here on the list is Social Finance, which is one of the premier impact investment firms, which I have covered in several reports. So if we take a look at one of my most recent articles titled Trump Ed 2025 School Choice Corporatization, Social Impact Finance, and the Dismantling of the Department of Education, if we scroll down towards the bottom, I document how the Charles Koch Foundation has collaborated with Google and Social Finance, which is a premier social impact investment corporation in partnership with Perscolis to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion through 0% loans for career pathways, training that fosters sustainable tech talent pipelines for the tech workforce. Okay, and then last year I did a video report in which I documented how Social Finance partners with FutureLearn, which is an online learning platform that's a subsidiary of the Open University in the United Kingdom, which was instrumental in the development of something known as the Cyclops Project, or Project Cyclops, which was linked to UNESCO Study 11, which set up the global information and communication technology infrastructure that paved the way for EdTech data tracking in the social credit economy of the fourth industrial revolution. All right, next on the list, we have the Impact Fund at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Okay, so this impact fund is effectively both an impact investment arm and a venture capital arm of Stanford's Graduate School of Business, and it has invested $1.5 million into Upswing. So Stanford University is noteworthy here due to its contributions to the very genesis of the internet itself through ARPANET, which was developed at Stanford Research Institute. And Stanford is also noteworthy here as the incubator of the PayPal mafia, whose venture capital firms have been bankrolling both the education technologies and financial technologies, which are geared to function as the engines of social credit data mining and social impact investing. All right, next on the list is Imaginable Futures. Okay, so if we scroll down a little bit, we'll see that Imaginable Futures is committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So investing focused on DEI outcomes or impact. Now, if we scroll down a little bit more, we get a little background story about imaginable futures, and we see that it is a creation of the Omidyar family, in particular Pierre and Pam Omidyar. Imaginable Futures grew out of the Omidyar network, which is part of the Omidyar group, according to the Imaginable Futures LinkedIn page. So Pierre Omidyar is a billionaire technocrat who is the founder of eBay, where Mark Andreessen once served on its board of directors. So it's worth noting here that according to investigative journalism published by the Gray Zone and other outlets, Pierre Omidyar has helped to facilitate CIA regime change operations through his involvement with non-governmental organizations or NGOs such as the National Endowment for Democracy and Frontier Design Group. So between Omidyar's Imaginable Futures and Google's Startup Accelerator, there are at least 2 upswing investors with ostensible ties to the CIA. Okay, just a couple more. The Impact America Fund invests in marginalized communities. Go down, and we could see Upswing in their portfolio. Then we have NC IDEA, which I believe stands for North Carolina Idea. Okay, so if we scroll down a little bit, you'll see that NC IDEA offers grant funding and support on the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. In other words, DEI impact, right? Impact investing for DEI outcomes. So then if we look at their portfolio and we scroll all the way down to the letter U, we will find Upswing. So in brief, Upswing has been bankrolled by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and World Economic Forum partners such as Google and JP Morgan Chase, along with other nonprofit foundations, venture capital firms, and impact investment firms with connections to Skull and Bones and the CIA, in order to advance a social credit economy in which AI bots like Anna determine student funding from public-private impact investment partnerships. Stated differently, Upswing is being bankrolled to advance a social credit economy in which students and educational institutions require AI analytics in order to get impact investment dollars, while impact investment firms require AI analytics to get reimbursed by governments, while governments require AI analytics for centralized planning of the global economy in the 4th Industrial Revolution. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share. If you'd like to check out more of my research, go to my website, schoolworldorder.info, where you can find archives of all my interviews, all my articles, and a bibliography of all my citations. There's also links to all my social media and video platforms, and you can sign up for my email list too, where you will receive notifications whenever I produce a new article, interview, or video. To support my work, become a research member for just $5 a month, and you'll gain access to my WebBrain database, which contains Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt's archive of U.S. Department of Education files and other rare historical documents. The database will be updated with weekly document dumps, and you will be notified whenever I upload a new dossier. Thanks again for watching. Peace.